You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. The Five Rings Podcast, your daily Olympic fix for all you freaks out there who are crazy about the Olympics, with Duane, Rollins, and Kevin Laramee. Here's Duane Rollins.
Yeah, indeed. This is Duane Rollins of the 24th Minute in Canada Soccer News. I'm joined by Kevin Laramee, and we're just going to talk about some Olympics. We started chatting on Twitter the other day and decided that there wasn't an Olympic podcast out there. We're both Olympic freaks, and thought this might be a fun thing to do. And who knows, if it goes well, maybe we'll do it a little bit longer. But for now, we're going to talk about Sochi, and we're gonna talk about it just from the perspective of two guys that have grown up and love watching the games. That sound about right, Kevin?
Oh, absolutely. I was 10 years old in 94 when Laramee was there, so big year. It's like it was yesterday, so big Olympic freak here.
So all good times. I was a little older than 10, and we're going to find that out in a minute in 1994. So we'll find that out in a minute when we go through
The Five Rings Podcast, your weekly amateur sports and Olympic sports show with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee. And now, without further ado, here's Duane Rollins.
So did it go well?
Oh my God, we suck, Duane.
Oh. I'm glad to hear that absolutely was the first thing that you said, which, sorry.
Yeah, but absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I made fun of my age. Those are two clear trends that have continued over the next 100 editions of the Five Rings Podcast. Although, let's be honest,
there's like 200 with the World Cup, Pan Am's, World Championships, so on and so forth. We did a lot of shows on the Five Rings over the last couple of years, but this is show branded number 100.
Which means it's our regular show number 100. It's also, for the first time ever, live. It's live for all of the interwebs to listen to live, because that's what live means. This is a bit of a test show for Kevin and I, although we're doing live shows with Soccer Today every day. We wanted to get the pacing down for an Olympic show because we will be going live at least once a day during the Olympics. We'll maybe have an occasion to go more than once a day in that if we have time, but nonetheless, we wanted to get that pacing down. But we also want to celebrate, before we go into the real period, full bore, 100 episodes of this little show that we created on a Twitter exchange over 2 years ago now, Kevin.
Yeah, that evolved into a couple of shows, that evolved into a network, that evolved into a lot of sports radio. But it all started with a Twitter exchange between, hey, we should do a Twitter. Where's Olympic podcast? I respond, oh, we should make one. Then you look at my bio. Oh, the guy's not kidding. Okay, then let's make one. And 2 years later, here we are. Well, more than 2 years. 3 years, actually.
Yeah, it's coming on. It will be 3 years in February because it was the Winter Olympics, of course. But yeah, look, yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, for those that don't know, had a long period of podcasting starting back in 2008 that ended when Ben Rycroft took a job, who was my co-host then. And It's Called Football had to be gone. So I'd stopped podcasting at that time, and I had the itch for it. I love podcasting. I enjoy it. I think it's where I am most talented as a media person. I can write too, but I kind of think that this is my focus and this is where I'm best suited. So when Kevin offered that, I jumped at it. We've told the story before, but it bears repeating that how this started technically was much different than how it looks today, Kevin.
Well, I wanted to play the clips earlier on, and you will have as well old bumpers from the beginning of Five Rings playing later on in the show between segments to show the evolution. That, first of all, yes, it's with your help. Everybody that listens to this show, not everybody, but a lot of our patrons are from the Five Rings here. Don and all of you here has helped us a lot grow as broadcasters, grow as producers, to now have a show that we can literally put on the radio and not even be ashamed of it now. So we did go from the beginning of a kind of an iPad balanced on a
Wine
bowl,
glass.
and I was doing on my side sometimes with just barely just a computer and nothing else. So no, we have come a long way.
Yeah, no, iPad and the wine glass in my bedroom with my other half wandered around the house doing whatever she was doing with barely a care to my sound quality. Sometimes she still doesn't care about my sound quality as well.
But now it doesn't anymore because I control everything.
That doesn't really, that's a different story altogether.
Exactly.
She
Now,
listen, so I can say that. No, but it was funny times. And you can hear there's a lot of shows with the drop quality and the Skype issues that we had to deal with.
Here's a little advice to anybody out there that uses Skype or any voice IP type of thing to do recordings. Get yourself an Ethernet cord and plug it in your laptop. Have you heard?
$5.
That's the best investment you could ever do.
$5. We went probably, what was it, about 6 weeks of nothing but issues with the internet, with constantly dropping interviews. We lost some interviews because my stupid internet would drop a $5 Ethernet cord. Have we had an internet? Have we had a single one? I think it maybe one or twice.
Yes.
Since then we've had it drop because it always will happen occasionally. But
outside of that, no, exactly. The quality of audio, the recording, the format, the frequency that we can now do, and the new setup as well, which is we actually have a studio now in my apartment. I have a dedicated studio room. Basically, it's a 16 by 16, pretty big, couple of chairs, couple of microphones. We're going to be working on having in live studio guests, but we do have the capabilities now for calling. We did go from a long way. I just don't mean to stress it, but sometimes it's kind of crazy to see the evolution of this thing.
Yeah, I consider the 5 rings too. I don't, the father, the mother, whatever, of the entire sports podcasting network. Obviously, you had Off the Woodworks. I had called Football before then. It's called Football. Doesn't exist anymore. Off the Woodworks still does, but those were two shows that pre-existed before Kevin and I started working together. This was the first show that we did. It predates Two Solitudes by about 4 weeks. So it is the oldest show that we do together on the network, and the second oldest show period on the network. So I have a lot of pride in that, and I think that it really is the evolution, the beginning of the sports podcasting network really comes out of 5 rings.
Yeah, exactly.
The one other thing that, we're going to talk a little bit about what we like about the show and how it's evolved. As I said, before we get into an actual show today, we're going to talk a little bit about some Canadian Olympic bid news. John Furlong is back in the picture. Paris sending spies to LA. Whether golf, we just need to kick it out at this point. And then we're going to do a gold, silver, bronze, and wood medal segment. That's those of you that are long-term listeners know what our gold, silver, bronze, wood medals are. That will be the core of our real content, like it is for any major event. We're going to preview a bit of that and help us with the pacing with it a little bit as well today by looking at our gold, silver, bronze, and wood medals from the all-time Summer Olympic events. So basically, we're picking an event from history. I'm going to have a history conversation. Kevin, I'll start this. I think what I'm most proud of with this show, and it is the show that I think that is my baby more than any other. It's my pet project in a lot of ways, because it's an Olympic show is what I always wanted to do. Soccer show is my bread and butter, but this is my passion project in a lot of ways. And I think I'm most proud of how it's evolved from kind of just a fun show, which I liked and enjoyed doing, to something that I think has a serious news element to it as well. And we've been on the forefront of talking about stories that have become international news stories after we started talking about them months before, Kevin.
Yes, exactly. We're not saying that it's because of us, but we're saying that it's been issues that we were able to pick up because of our different type of coverage. We do get our news from different sources and get maybe the news before mainstream. So we use our networks and our contacts to get those information. And we talked about Almaty in depth. We talked about the Russian Minsk race walking center scandal. That was one of the early whistleblowing type of situation that led to the whole Russian track and field being banned now from Rio. So we actually talked about very important issues, especially with doping over the last few months as well. So yeah, it's something I'm very proud of as well, Duane.
Yeah, and you look at on the bid sides, and I think that a lot of our focus has always been on where games are going to go and all that. And I'm also proud of the fact that we interviewed No Boston Olympics, and we're part of that, the Boston bid, from when it was an idea to when it was something that was fully functional and being resisted, to the resistance winning. We covered that whole story start to finish and provided, I think, both sides of the argument. In fact, we tried to provide a direct interview from the Boston 2024 people, but they never returned our emails. No, Boston Olympics had no problem with that, which might tell you something about the reason why they lost the fight.
Exactly.
Guys.
True. But you're absolutely right. And it's there's a lot of things we covered as well over the last 2 years: World Cups, World Championships, as well as Olympics. And it really makes you look at every sport in a broader way. When you love Olympics, the both behind the scenes and on the field, on the playing surfaces, it really makes you see things as a whole when we do shows like this one. And it helps us in every other thing that we do as well, because of that broad spectrum of vision that we get from looking at events and Olympics like we do.
Yeah, and I'm very interested to see to be part of the Rio coverage that we will provide daily in this. Now, we started daily with Sochi. I think that what our ability to work together and our understanding of our pacing in that our Rio shows are going to be just so much better than what they even were back then, even though I think they were good enough back then that we developed an audience right away. So I'm really excited by that. But before we end this segment, Kevin, I want to sort of talk about our favorite moments over the past few years. And we'll start with you. What is if you had to pinpoint it to one or two favorite moments on the Five Rings podcast, what would you?
It's one, and it was my first credential as a journalist. It was my first event attending live. It was my first press box, and it was because of the Five Rings podcast. We were credentialed for the 2014 World Championship of Short Track Speed Skating in Montreal, where Laramee won the gold medal, the world championship in the 1500 meters, which I saw there live, which you can listen right now. And this was for me the best moment. Just to listen to it now, Duane, it still gives me chills. It was the best experience, and it was the first one. So it's hard to recreate that feeling. It was the first. It was my first, and it will always have a special place in my heart.
Well, getting down there, it's a bit of a rush. The first time you're in a scrum, the first time you're in a mixed zone and stuff like that, and you got to experience that day. Mine's a little less single moment, more over a couple events. Obviously, the lead up to the Pan Ams in my own city was something that's special to me because it was in my own city. And just being there and walking into the Pan Am Stadium, the beach volleyball, on the second day of the events, and seeing the branding and seeing all of the stuff that's associated with the games, and realizing that I had been talking about this for so long and it was happening in my own backyard. That's a massive moment that I associate with Five Rings a lot, because we had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people involved in those games. So it felt personal to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Also funny, the Commonwealth Games, covering them last summer, it rekindled my appreciation for the Commonwealth Games, because having the show to do made me, like it's a lot of work, but it focused me into rewatching them with a different eye and enjoying them again in a way that I hadn't for years. And the last moment I'm going to remember is again an overall one, and it's just finding Evan Dunphy's story out, giving him an additional platform, not that he doesn't have platforms on his own, but giving him an additional platform to use, and learning from him, and now cheering for him blindly to win, because I think that there's no other athlete in these Rio Games that deserves victory more than Evan because of the work he's done on level. So just having that understanding and that personal connection, how small it is, with an Olympian that is going to Rio and has done great work, and that we all should be proud of in anywhere in the world, but especially because he's ours as a Canadian.
To highlight Evan Dunphy's investigative work as well, just go back on the timeline. It was before everybody else was talking about the Russian Track and Field Federation, Duane. And it was one of the scandals that helped uncover it all. So the work of Evan Dunphy has to be noted, and we cannot hope more. We cannot cheer louder for Evan. The good guys wins usually, yeah. And that's how it's supposed to be.
That's the hope.
That's how you book it. That's how a booker makes a good show. It's the good guys win at the end.
All right, that's enough nostalgic talk. Let's take a quick break now, Kevin. We'll come back and we'll give you an actual show, new news and all that sort of good stuff right after this.
You listen to the Five Rings Olympic Podcast with Duane and Kevin. If you want to reach us, you can always do it by email. 5ringspodcast@gmail.com or by Twitter @5ringspodcast. Now back to the show, everyone.
Jared's fire.
Yeah, old school bumper for an old school type of show.
All right. Let's start with the eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Let's start with golf. Kevin, I was going to write down every golfer that's decided not to go now, but
you ran out of paper?
I ran out of paper. I don't know what to think of the golf dropouts. So Zika is the reference point that they're using, and I don't want to dismiss anyone's fear about Zika because there are legitimate concerns. I know some people. We talked to the pharmacist on the show. I forget his name right now. I apologize for that, but we talked to that gentleman. I've talked to people in my own personal life that have pharmaceutical kind of backgrounds, that have medical backgrounds, to try and get a better understanding of this virus. And even though I do think that there are things that you can do to make this okay, I'm not going to discount anyone's fear about it, but I just tend to not completely believe that that's the only reason these golfers are pulling out. Some of it's just, I don't want to go to Brazil in the middle of my season.
Yeah, because when it's the first event of something, the importance hasn't been established yet as well. Like, we all know how important the tournament of tennis is for the Olympics. It's considered the fifth major every 4 years, but that hasn't been established in golf yet. So now it's still up in the air how important it is, and not knowing if it's going to come back in 4 years. Maybe it's a one-off. Maybe it's not something we should get involved to because it's going to disappear anyway. So there's that thinking too, until it's established and we all know it's going to be there for a long time, and you can dedicate time out of your busy schedule for this tournament to get ready, get prepared, the training, the mental preparation to be an Olympian, to assist, and to all that's involved. Well, you can only do this if you really think the tournament is important. And now with hindsight, with all the big names, McIlroy and so on and so forth, that are not going, you kind of realize that for the golfers, that tournament is not important, at least not yet.
Yeah, and look, I remember. I'm old enough to remember. There's another age reference of mine. I always said that we have to get one in every show, right?
That's a quota. Yes, it's like Mo Babuli for the two solitudes.
Yeah, I recall the '88. It was '88, I believe, when the first one came out. It might have been '92. The first for Full Metal. '88 was a demonstration, if memory serves. Anyway, it was around that time, and I recall the tennis players having similar attitudes towards the tournament at that point. It wasn't exactly something that was necessarily viewed upon as a great big deal. I believe if you look at some of the American participation in the 96 games on the tennis side, that was the first time that some of the bigger players started to say, this is a priority for me to win.
Sampras and so on, yeah.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know whether it's ever a main priority for the top levels, your Djokovic's, your Murray's, and all that. But then again, Andy Murray made the reference this week at Wimbledon in the press conferences to say that he was going to go to Rio, that he wasn't dropping out. He's going to go to defend his championship. If you look at Andy Murray's career, that Olympic title on the Wimbledon grounds was vital to revitalizing him and getting him over that hump to finally win Wimbledon itself. Yep. Just a year or so later. So the tennis tournament has gotten to the point where it is absolutely relevant. It's a fifth major. I don't think it's one through four,
but it's fifth, yeah.
But it's a fifth major, and I think that's where golf can maybe get to one day. And I think it'll get there. One last final thought, Kevin. I think the women's side might get there quicker than the men's side because female golfers don't have the same level of
they don't have the same platform, basically.
Yeah, platform that the men's do right now. So I think that for that reason alone, it's worth all of us cheering for golf to get a foothold in these games and not to get pulled out.
And a tournament, like example, we'll use the tennis of 2012 in Wimbledon and Andy Murray. How for Andy Murray, there's a pre-Wimbledon 2012 Olympic tournament and a post. How it was a launching platform for him. He broke the glass ceiling in his confidence with this victory, and it changed everything then. And he created a moment, and that moment wants to be redone, reachieved by other athletes, and that tournament is bigger and better because of it. Until that happens, and if it happens for our women's side, that a 16-year-old champion that barely makes every cut goes on a stupid run and wins the whole Olympic tournament and gets the gold and creates a great story and it's mainstream, well, the tournament in itself will become better for it. And until there's a story like this in a tournament and the Olympic side of golf, then maybe big top players will consider it more important, or maybe they won't, because if it's not back in 2020, who cares?
Well, and on the Canadian side of things, I think that the women's golf tournament might be something that we're paying attention to, because there's a young lady by the name of Brooke Henderson that just broke onto the scenes.
90-foot putt?
Yeah. And who absolutely, I just pulled it up to make sure, 100% sure. Brooke has the Olympics as one of her major goals. It's huge, the team said. It's up there with the other 5 majors on the LPGA. It's a 6th major. There are 34 events I'm planning on playing, but I'm hoping to peak for that one. So that's Brooke Henderson, a woman who just won a major. And a woman, I use that term loosely, just a woman. She's 18. So that's something to look forward to there. So yeah, as I said, I think sometimes, to finish that thought though, we do tend to view all sports through the vision of the male athlete only, and we kind of forget the female athlete side of things. I think this show aspires to not do that. But in this particular case, this is when people are saying, oh, well, just screw the golfers. I think that maybe you have to look on the female side of the draw to understand why it's vital and important for the sport of golf to get there. It's going to be difficult, though. It'll be interesting to see how much attention it does get during the Olympics itself, because it's not a sport that lends itself to the ADHD of an Olympic broadcast. It's a sport that's sort of about watching for 4 or 5 hours straight. And I think golf fans will do that, but I'm not sure if Olympic fans will do more than just look in. But I guess you could poke into a broadcast to watch Brooke Henderson shoot her shots, right?
And it's easy type of sports to get the highlight, to get the nice shot and bring the nice shot live during an event, or you just record it just happened. Put the replay on the live broadcast somewhere else. There's a lot of that can happen as well with golf. Like, oh, she drained a 35-foot chip right in. Well, you will see that replay. Oh, okay, we're breaking live to the golf. Look at this replay. She just took the lead. It's a sport that actually you can follow without having to broadcast it live, but having every 15, 20 minutes or so a recap of what just happened.
Yeah, well, and look, and I can remember when Mike Weir won the Masters here in Canada, the only Canadian ever do so, how much it grabbed the attention of Canadians, and how people were sitting around bars and watching that final round. And just to speculate, if Ms. Henderson does emulate what she did recently in an Olympic and gets into a 4th round where she's in medal contention in that final day, I can see a lot of Canadians, because golf's something they understand. You don't have to explain to whoever that you're sitting beside in the bar what the sport is. They know right away what it is. I can see it really grabbing at people's attention. So there's a lot of potential for it, I think.
And it's a sport that's pretty easy. That little white ball, put it in that little hole. That's about it.
It's easy, is it?
Yeah, it's that easy.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying when I'm playing, but yeah.
That's been my experience in golf over the years, is easy. Yeah. All right.
It's always easy when you start, and when you finish, you say, yeah, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah, I stopped keeping score once. But anyway, let's move on now. The Canadian side of things, we were talking about Brooke Henderson, so we'll continue Canadian. John Furlong is a name that a lot of Canadians will recognize, that was the head of the very popular, very successful VANOC, Vancouver Olympic Organization Committee. He has been brought back into the Olympic fold. He'd been working for the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Major League Soccer team there, on a sort of business side of things, getting sponsorships and so on and so forth. He has been brought in by the COC to try and help cities in Canada get one of 26 or 28, the winter 26 bid or the summer 28 bid. And I think that's kind of an interesting call to arms that's happening here in Canada. I do maintain that if LA doesn't win 24, that whoever emerges as the top North American candidate in 28 will be the front runners. So I think Canada is part of that conversation, and for them to bring a guy like that in, albeit I don't know if John will still be around and working in 2028, but nonetheless, he's 65 now, but he's a guy that can certainly help that happen. And it's an interesting development there, Kevin.
It's taking advantage of the expertise of somebody that's there. It's literally because they could have not asked him to be a consultant and be involved, but his expertise would have been lost. It's good to have him being back to where he had the most amount of success in his entire career as a manager of events and dealers with big organizations like the IOC and all that. So, for the Canadian Olympic Committee, it's a very good hire, and it's at least we'll take advantage of expertise that we did before, because if you remember, 2010 Olympics were considered a success and were not a money-losing adventure, which is a big task when you talk about Olympics.
Yeah, and speaking domestically, you would need a name like that behind any potential bid launch to have any chance of getting over the initial skepticism that will naturally evolve from any Olympic bid out there. I can tell you right now, Toronto announces tomorrow they're bidding for 2028, that the initial knee-jerk reaction of pretty much 95% of the city will be negative. So to get over that hump, and I think that's most cities now, and we see that in the bids, how they're playing out. So, yeah, you need some kind of track record there, and if he's there and he can say, look, there are ways to make things profitable. This is the success I had in Vancouver. You all remember how fun that was. You all remember how good that was for the image of the city, how it boosted the morale in that city, and that might help that get over over the hump of that initial resistance, as I said, which is the key, because, the bids, as we're seeing with the summer 2024 bid right now, they're just falling off like flies, like the winter bid did, because cities just resist them now.
Duane? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. El Matty. The games no one wants. I think there's some phrases that we need to get into this show, and we
need to make a t-shirt. The games no one wants.
Yes.
Put that on a t-shirt. Well, t-shirt never sells, but never. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, someone should buy our t-shirts. All right. Let's move to the final one. I found this kind of funny that some people were mad about this in LA, but Paris allegedly sent spies to LA, the Paris Olympic bid. Speaking of it, have you seen the Paris Olympic bid logo? It's really cool.
No, I haven't seen it. I've seen the Beijing one, and I'm not a big fan, but I haven't seen the Paris one.
It's the Eiffel Tower, but done really minimalistic, so that it's a 2-4 done in a way that looks like the Eiffel Tower. So the only criticism I could have for it is if you don't know it's not 21 instead of 24, you might think it's 21. But as soon as you see 24, you can't unsee it, and you still know that it looks like the Eiffel Tower. So it's very cleverly done.
Well, it's better than the 2012 London Olympic sign that once you see it disguised as the Simpsons logo, you can ever unsee what you saw. So yeah.
There you go. So I found that kind of funny. And of course, why wouldn't you send some spies to the grounds to see where things are and, do all the things that are there? The only question I would have is whether you would then extend that and, maybe have some guys that are on the ground trying to rouse up opposition locally and things like that, kind of playing dirty pool that way. So that's the questions you might have.
That's a Pandora's box that you don't want to open. So maybe no LA 2024 will be funded by Paris.
Yeah.
You're looking at, this becoming very interesting, and we need to call James Bond or something.
Yeah, well, that's what it sounds like. It's like a spy novel, right? And we laugh, but I mean, let's not kid ourselves.
It's probably close to reality.
Stuff like that's probably happened before Olympic bidding.
Yeah.
I'm going to check in to see who Bread Not Circuses was funded by and whether they all say y'all a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of past Olympics, Kevin, after our next break, what we're going to do, and I'll explain this a little bit more in the lead up to this, because this will be a main part of our live daily broadcast during the Olympics themselves. We've done what's called the gold, silver, bronze, and wood medals each day. And the gold, silver, and bronze are kind of self-intuitive what they mean, but the wood medal, a lot of people might be confused by. And what the wood medal means is it's Kevin and I identifying what the most negative or critical thing that has happened during the day, something that we're not happy with, something we think needs to happen. So for instance, if I'm talking about the Rio Olympics right now, I might give a wood medal to the fact that the state government is declaring bankruptcy. That's the kind of thing that a wood medal would get, something, or protests, or an athlete that really underperformed or something like that. It's a negative part of our free conversation. Not that we want to be negative about the Olympics, but we have to be balanced. And that's what the wood medal speaks to during when we do the gold, silver, bronze, and wood.
And I have a feeling we'll have a lot of them during the Rio Olympics.
Yeah, and that's, especially in the week before. The gold, silver, and bronze obviously are our first, second, and third best performances of that day. That's how we've always done that. Or sometimes with the Commonwealth Games, for instance, we did it over 2 days, or the Pan Ams was over whatever the stretch of period time between our broadcasts is when we give that gold, silver, and bronze for. In the Summer Games, we've never done one for Summer's Games before, a full Olympic Summer Games. So we don't know how hectic it's going to be because we haven't experienced it yet. Yep. Certainly there is a lot going on in a Summer Game, so we'll figure out what exactly the timing is as we get closer, but certainly that's what the format will be.
thanks to my DVR and to my laptop that I can record actual shows that will be broadcasted on the CBC website. So thanks to recording capabilities.
Yeah, the games when their time zoners are overnight, the DVRs are absolutely a godsend because I used to wake up, well, Sochi games, for instance, a lot of the stuff happened at like 2, 3 in the morning, right? So I would typically wake up around 5 in the morning, and I would have about 4 hours of programming from when I went to bed. I'm still not getting a lot of sleep, but I would get a little bit of sleep, more normal sleep and keep somewhat normal hours. And I would be able to catch up on those 3 or 4 hours by the time it got live for the morning shows at 9. So that was my plan for that. But the real Olympics won't quite be as bad because it's actually an hour behind us. So it's really relatively the same time zone.
Yep. And for me, it's going to be a little early sometimes, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah, Kevin will be catching up at the 7 a.m. to the 11 a.m.
Exactly. Because I'll be, for once, I think I'll be able to maybe go closer to a normal human being schedule.
Exactly. We'll figure out when we're recording these things as the games get closer and we have a good hard look at the schedule. I suspect we'll probably time it somewhere so it falls after the morning heats but before the finals in the evening. I suspect that's when the broadcast will go out. We'll firm that up as it gets closer. All right, enough of that. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back and give you a bit of a preview of what a gold, silver, bronze, wood segment sounds like.
Hey, it's Kevin of the Sports Podcasting Network. On SPN, on top of What's the Score, the Sports News Quiz, you can find a plethora of great sports podcasts. Hardwood Radio, Gridiron Radio, Sports, It's in the Game, Scuderia F1, the second most listened to F1 podcast in the whole world, Soccer Today, live radio shows like Open Lines After Dark, MLS Postgame Show, 202 Soccer Podcast, Off the Woodworks, and much, much more. All that on the Sports Podcasting Network.com.
A lot of shows, Kevin.
Yes, and they're not even all named in that bumper.
Yeah, and if you want to listen to, if you're a football fan, soccer fan out there, you can listen to our daily soccer shows at 11 a.m. Eastern every day. All right.
A show that I'm very proud of that I would put against any other live soccer radio shows.
There you go. Coming on to our fourth week next week. So there you have it.
Exactly.
All right. The gold, silver, bronze, wood medals. Our theme for today is summer events. And that's a bit of a broad theme, a bit on purpose, because it's sometimes fun when we're having historical gold, silver, bronze, woods to make it a bit historical, a bit broad so that we can open it up however we interpret it. But we just made this events. They could be an entire Olympics. We could have named the entire Oslo Olympics. I don't know if we would have done that, but at any rate, we could have named that.
Could have, yes.
The Melbourne equestrian competition could have been one of our medals. It could have been a specific event. It could have been the dressage in the Melbourne Olympics. These things probably aren't going to be named, but they could be named is my point. So this is what we're doing here. And we're going to start, as always, with the bad end of things, with the wood medal, Kevin. I'll let you go first. What is your wood medal for all time Summer Olympic events?
It's a story in itself. It started with a scandal, and it evolved during my lifetime to what I was told when I was a kid wasn't actually true. And when I learned when I was older watching documentaries, might be closer to reality. The Ben Johnson, the scandal of doping in 1988. The fact that if you now watch documentaries, the famous one by the CBC, where you actually learn that there's other doping tests that were done during the same period of time, then other positive were, but were not announced and were covered up, and all that story and the situation in itself and the way it evolved, and Ben Johnson was vilified for decades, and finally the story is a little bit different now. So that whole story in itself is my wooden medal in the Summer Olympic history, the way it was dealt with from 88 moving forward, and it took decades for the truth to see the light.
Slow Joe. Slow Joe.
Yeah.
Slow Joe. Dirty.
There's others too, Carl. Exactly.
Yeah, well, particularly Florence Griffith Joyner, who still has world records, and Ben Johnson's vilified. That's a bit of the Canadian coming out in me. Like, I'll admit that fully. Because,
a bit.
Well, there's a lot of the Canadian coming out in me, and Ben Johnson was a hero of mine when that happened. So yeah. I personally felt that. I was young, and it was, one of those coming of age, like loss of innocence sort of stories that exist, that your sporting hero gets taken down 2 days after he had his highest moment.
It's Hulk Hogan losing to the Ultimate Warrior. It's your hero being vilified for something that's not really the truth. It's learning that it's fake. It's learning Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's that type of emotion.
It's learning that there's nuance in the world, which is not always easy for a kid to understand. And certainly that's what I felt like at the time. And it remains to this day in Canada. Ben Johnson is a massive trigger for a lot of people in terms of where we fit in the world. And then there is a stubborn belief out there that Ben was purposely picked as a patsy because he's not the smartest guy. And Canada isn't the highest power. It's a middle power that had enough recognition, and there would be enough influence by taking him down from Canada and from this guy. But they're not guys that are going to fight back like Carl Lewis might have, like Florence Griffith-Joyner might have. And the steroid situation was getting out of control. So I don't want to, that said, nuance, right? And I'm an adult now, not a kid. I'm not looking at this story through kids' eyes. He was dirty. There's no doubt about it. Like, Christ, look at him. All you have to do is look at him to know.
Yeah, but look at all of them. Have you ever watched films of athletic competition from the late 80s, early 90s? It just jumps to your mind. It's like, wow, they're bigger and faster than actually now. There's something off here.
Yeah, just the muscles on the physique on him.
There's no muscle supposed to be there.
Is insane. Like, sprinters don't look like that anymore. And part of that's that it's a bit cleaner, I think. And part of it, though, is that the drugs that they use don't bulk them up as much like that anymore. They
how
use
stupid it was.
Now.
Can you imagine how stupid it was back then to actually take steroids and be heavier and bulkier on your upper body side when you were a sprinter? The sports science was in an early infancy, even at the late 80s compared to today.
Yeah, so there's lots of things there, but even just that it was the I mentioned that term "end of innocence" a minute ago. I think it was the end of innocence for a lot of track fans out there, and track is one of those sports that if you like it grabs a hold of you in a way that it is very difficult for you to shake it, even when it tries to shake it out of you. And God help us, track has tried to shake it out of us by the way that it is delivered itself over the years, the way that it has acted over the years, the way that its athletes have acted over the years, the way that it has thrown clean athletes under the bus and glorified dirty athletes, even if it's clear that they are, until the very last moment that the proof is no longer deniable. And that makes it difficult sometimes to support and to justify that sport. But God help us, when the Olympic 100-meter gun goes off, the world will be watching still.
Exactly. All right, Duane, what is your wood medal?
My wood medal has to do with we talked about boycotts the other day, and I'm going to specifically target the Los Angeles 1984 boycott as my wood medal. There was no other reason for it other than pure politics. The reason given for it by the Russians and by the Eastern Bloc was that they didn't feel that their athletes would be safe in LA, that they would be at a security risk there. And the rhetoric of the time, and I am someone who I read a lot about history and I watch a lot of history documentaries, and my favorite era to look at and to learn about is the Cold War. So I know a little bit about and I lived through it as a young kid too. So I know a little bit about what the prevailing mood was at the time. And I can understand how there might be a little something on the Russian side of things where, yes, those Russian athletes would have been booed and they might have felt uncomfortable at times. But in terms of the idea that they were in danger, that's kind of a silly argument. And it was an excuse basically as revenge for the 1980 boycott. And although I'm Western, so my bias is going to come out here, I can see a greater justification for that because they were arguing against the invasion of Afghanistan, which was, an illegal invasion by the Russian troops at that point. Now, it's not to say that the Western troops were innocent and all that. I don't want to get into geopolitics here, but it was a bit more justified than just simply the revenge boycott of 1984, which did take, a lot of world champions, a lot of competitions, a lot of events, and make them asterisks, to put a lot of asterisks there. And that's, even though I was a kid and I enjoyed them purely at the time, as an adult, I have to in my mind remember that Canada's performance, and I'm speaking as Canadian here because that's how my child brain processed them at the time. that those victories weren't quite as big as important as they might have been otherwise. And I think that in retrospect, I absolutely would have the Russians there, even though some of them would have been dirty, and have less Canadian victories, but have those victories pure. And I hate boycotts, and I really feel bad for the athletes that lost out on that. And that's just where I'm coming from.
And it's funny how history repeats itself, because now we're heading into Rio, where Russia is banned in the track and field for now, and maybe other federations to follow. So it's going to be a repeat of, well, not a repeat, it's a different story, but it's a related type of story than your wood and metal.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, I mean, the Russians, for putting themselves in the position and putting it down over the entire competition, or would be an absolutely great wood metal pick. It's just so recent, and we talked about it so much that it doesn't necessarily fit right now. All right, let's move to positive, Kevin, and we'll start with bronze, and I'll start this one. Okay. My bronze medal, I'm going to go way back. I'm going to go way back, even way back to 1896. No. I was not around to watch this. However,
you're not related to Pierre de Coubertin? Come on, I thought he was your buddy.
No, maybe if you believe in past lives, and that might even be like 2 lives ago at this point. But at any rate, the marathon. I just love the story of how they took this myth, this ancient Athens, ancient Greek myth, and made it into a sporting event that still maintains to today. The legend of marathon, how there was an invading army. The page ran from Athens to Marathon. It was 26 miles away, dropped dead after saying that the army was going to roll in, saved everyone. He was a martyr. It's a great little one of those awesome martyr myth stories that exists out there. For someone to look at that and go, you know what, we should have that race, especially in 1896 when sports science was not anywhere close to where it is now today. Yeah. And the idea of running 26 miles was, bordering on suicidal.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and you have to put yourself back in the day as well. It's the day of newspaper. It's the day of sporting event we're covering by newspaper. It's the early day of the Tour de France was going to start 4 years later. Well, 5 years later. So it's all of those way to cover sports. It's by newspaper. So you need to have a catch to your story. You need to have something to sell the newspaper, and that's where the idea of the marathon comes into, because it's a story that it's easy to sell, it's easy to tell, and that's why those stories were created. And the newspaper were very influential in the sports world back in those days, especially in the early days of the Olympic movement.
Yeah, nowadays we'd say hashtag narrative, right? Like it created a story, it created a color around an event, and gave it purpose and meaning where there might not have been any otherwise. I just love the fact that 26 miles, it makes no sense. It's a distance, right? Like, why are you running 26 miles?
Well, why run anyways? But that's my bias here.
Yeah,
that's something else.
But like every other distance is like a mile, or half a mile, or whatever.
Yeah, the other one kind of makes sense. They're like round, at least. You know what I mean? It's like it's a starting point and definite end point. Not like, okay, let's stop here.
Yeah, but the distance between Athens and some obscure Greek town is not normally a distance that you would have emerge into an event that has become one of the classic events of track and field. Now, I do like the fact, and I also enjoy this. This is jumping ahead a couple of years, and I'll add this to my bronze medal, is that English arrogance changed the actual distance, because in the London Olympics, the Queen wanted to watch the finish line.
The first one, not the recent one, right?
Well, yeah. No, yeah. The first, there's been 3. The very first one. So the Queen, it was the king or the queen, whatever. It was one of them. It was a monarch. They wanted to watch the end of this. And because, God help us, we're not going to move the monarch's box, they actually moved the finish line to correspond with the monarch's box, so that it would end right in front of them. So the distance down the marathon, of course, is 26 miles, 385 yards, because of that discrepancy that existed there. It's just funny, and I love the fact that these traditions have continued, and it is to this day, when you think about that story and that story, you kind of chuckle, because it is color and it is fun, and sports are supposed to be fun ultimately when everything else is stripped away. So that's my bronze medal. Kevin, yours?
Mine is going back to 1988. I was just 4 years old, but it's reading about it after the fact. I always love stories of not necessarily underdog, but when somebody falls down or hit his head literally, and comes back up and performs better, conquers his fears, and wins a gold medal in a unprecedented way. That's what Greg Louganis did in 1988, trying to do the perfect dive at that moment. The sport evolved since then, but trying to do the perfect dive on that board and hitting his head earlier in the competition, having that fear and be able to pull off that same dive for the gold medal is something incredible. The story, the rise, the glory, those are the type of story that catches your attention during the Olympics, and that type of story illustrates what type of moments an Olympic can create. And I thought that it deserved a spot in my ranking because of what it illustrates as a whole as well. It's a great story by itself, but what it illustrates as an athlete conquering something deep inside after suffering a traumatic event and being able to overcome that and get to the glory part.
Greg Louganis is one of those names that sticks with me from my childhood, because I watched a lot of I've told the story before about how, although I wouldn't call myself a diving fan by any means, I don't turn it on, now, like I wouldn't put it on the TV right now. I'd probably flip by it, although God knows I'd probably stay for a minute. But you know what I mean? Like I'd choose other sports over.
You say that, but you would watch it 100%.
Yeah. But the Olympics roll around, and I always watch the diving. And part of that is because it's the one sport that my mother really loves. And I've watched a lot of diving over the years with her. And even to this day, when I'm not living in the same place, I will call her up and say, "Oh, the diving's on, Mom, if you want to watch it," and she'll turn it on. So there's a bit of a bonding thing there, I think, as well. So the Greg Louganis was a superstar, an absolute legend that existed back then. Funny story too, quickly before we move on. The U.S. Swimming trials, of course, are going on right now, and the U.S. Olympic, it was the NBC Olympic feed. I don't know how the divers tie into the swimming field, but anyway, there's a lot of Olympic news coming out of the States right now. It's kind of what it comes down to. Anyway, they posted a Vine of Greg Louganis, and I forget the other woman's name, but it was another gold medalist from the female side doing a synchronized dive off the platform at this day. So Greg Louganis, to this age, is still fit and thin and able to dive off of a platform and do a couple flips and get in the water. So I think, to him, there's not a lot of people at Christ, how old would he be now? He'd be at least in his 50s, if not older than that, right?
And that's the one side of the Olympics we often forget, Duane. It's not just a competition, it's a lifestyle. And usually, majority of the Olympians continue to have an active lifestyles for the rest of their lives after the Olympics. And in a way, it's the importance factor of this movement as a whole is the healthy lifestyle that comes with it as well.
Yeah, and he's 56. January 29th, 1960, Greg Louganis was born. So yeah, so it's quite amazing to see him still dive. Yeah, here it is right now. Greg Louganis gets back in his Speedo to perform a synchro platform dive. That's incredible. Anyway, all right, so I thought I'd bring that. My silver medal is a little more recent.
Yeah, bronze. You started with bronze. Sorry, your silver.
My silver medal. My silver medal is a lot more recent than that. It's from the last Olympics, and it's going to be a Canadian-centric, but I'm going to specifically point that epic game between the Canadian and the United States women's soccer teams as being absolutely worthy of a medal nod here. It was one of those rivalry games that transcends the sport, that transcends even fans of the Olympics, that drew them in. It's everything the Olympics are good about. It has good and bad, depending on where you are, because there's bad that the Americans will point out to the Canadian side and make them the villain in this. But up here, obviously, the good is Christine Sinclair leading the pure is the driven snow, great Canadian hardworking gals against those evil American imperialistic, it's all that sort of good stuff. It's fun stuff.
And that indirect free kick to this day. This day.
And robbed by a bureaucratic decision that was unjust. And it has everything that sports is supposed to be. You could write a damn novel about that game. And it gets talked about amongst general sports fans in Canada 4 years later. I have a feeling it will get talked about 10, 15, 20 years later. It was one of the all-time epic moments in Canadian Olympic history, and we lost the game. And I think that speaks to the fact that it's one of the all-time greatest games in the history of women's soccer as well, if not just soccer. There was a Guardian article.
Sports.
Yeah, sports even. But there was a Guardian article that specifically said that, this is the best game of the football tournament just took place. And they weren't referring to the gender. They meant that was the best game of the tournament. And it really was. It had everything you would want in a sporting contest. And overall, then Canada, for them to recover from that a few days later, basically desperately defend for 90 minutes and unfairly to the French, but nonetheless grab a bronze medal, which was as good as gold to them, become icons in the Canadian sporting culture right now to this day, to the point that they will be under a lot of pressure in Rio, and we'll get to that in the days ahead. But just a wonderful moment, and it speaks to what the Olympics can do at their best, Kevin.
No, it's a very, very good medal. My silver is a story that we never really talked about here on the Five Rings podcast, but with the passing of Muhammad Ali a few weeks ago, we kind of have to talk about it now. Light heavyweight gold medal, 1960 boxing tournament. Cassius Clay comes out of obscurity. A little boy from Louisville, Kentucky, dreamed big, and it started at the Olympics in 1960. Comes out of nowhere, comes out of obscurity, and comes in to never be forgotten by winning that light heavyweight tournament with a flair that we haven't seen before, and we will probably never see ever again. And it started kind of in 1960 at those Olympics.
Yeah, there's a famous story about Muhammad Ali getting back to the United States in Louisville and being denied service at a restaurant and allegedly throwing his gold medal into the river as protest. If I don't, if you're not going to accept,
it's a true story. He was given a new medal in the 90s.
When in his death, there were many people that were saying that it might not be as true as people thought. However, he may have just lost the medal. But anyway, regardless,
I like the myth better, and the myth at least tells a story that it still stands.
Well, precisely. But so he was associated with that myth, or true story, depending on your perspective, so recently, till the day he died. It was one of the stories that was told quite frequently that day. So he was associated with the Olympic movement, and obviously he won that medal under his birth name rather than his later chosen name. But it was something that I think really launched him into those mainstream successes. Obviously, I wasn't around back then either.
But we all remember 1996 when he came out to light the Olympic torch, being the final
which is the
barrier.
Other part of this, yeah.
Which, after a couple of months or years of obscurity of not knowing his condition, he was battling Parkinson's with one of very, very strong case as well. And during that battle, he was able to still appear and be able to do that great moment that he still remembered to this day. It was a global type of event that was talked around the world. And you don't get a lot of people in this world that when they do something, the whole world wants to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, the 96 Olympics are remembered for Canadian victories here and for being a very successful Canadian game. But by and large, overall, they're one of those games that kind of gets lost in the sands of time, so to speak. But the one iconic memory from their moment, mystery vision from that games was, the shaking Muhammad Ali standing there lighting the torch with everyone standing and giving him the ovation that I think that, if you know and watch some of the recent coverage of him, he never really got in that universal way during his actual competing career, right? So that was one of those great moments that transcends and stands out and remains today. And it was, the simple act of lighting the flame. Contrast that to Wayne Gretzky in a pickup truck, and anyway,
and the thing not working properly.
Oh my God, we do not light the flames well in this country. If we get a third games or if we get a fourth games, we really need to do it better this time.
Sure. Well, yeah, we'll see when we get there.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. And I think I even said that in the lead up to that is watch, we're going to screw the flame up because we always do.
Hey, at least
we get too cute. Canadians get too cute when we light the flame. We try and do something like in Montreal, it was an Anglo and a Franco. They lit the flame, so no one knew who the hell they were. And like, they were just kids. In Calgary, they picked, it was like a 13-year-old figure skater that didn't have any national aspirations. They just wanted to pick someone who represented the youth and the future and all this sort of stuff.
So like, Canadian. That's so Canadian.
Yeah. So at least in Vancouver, well, that's just it in Vancouver. Who did light the flame? Was it the first flame they lit that it didn't work, or was it the second flame they lit with the pickup truck? My God, like, come on, guys, just put a famous athlete and light the flame.
Just have him run to the thing and light it up.
That's my flaming wood medal for that right now. Anyway, that's
and yes, if you're a new listener to Five Rings, we do go on red sometimes.
Yeah, there you have it. All right, my gold medal, Kevin. My gold medal is, in general, the Olympics, that when I look back at it, there's two that I think of most fondly. I know you talk about Lillehammer all the time on the winter side, and that was a great games. But for me, I've always been a summer first kind of guy when it comes to the Olympics, and Barcelona is a huge one for me because it was so beautiful and it compelled me to like go to Barcelona one day, largely based on those Olympics.
That diving tournament, competition outside with the whole city in the background. Wow, that was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I purposely went to the diving venue so I could see that view with my own eyes many years later. I went to the pool to touch the pool that Mark Tewksbury won a gold medal in for Canada. So it was one of those journey I took because of that started in 1992.
It was your pilgrimage.
Yeah, exactly. Another games, though, that stand out, and what I'm going to pick there, because there was one moment that sort of it transcends, and that's a word I've used a lot in this, but it transcends the world. It's not just a Canadian moment. It's not a personal moment. And it's the Sydney Games in 2000. I love those games for the spirit that the Australian people brought forward. The Aussie, 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 oi, 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 to this day stands out when you hear that. They had such great victories in that Olympics. They did so well. It was so exciting from start to finish. Even though it was in the middle of the night, it was getting you up to making you want to get up in the middle of the night to watch those games because they were so well put on and they were so great on the fields and on the tracks and in the pools. And there's one moment from that game above all else, and that is, of course, Kathy Freeman turning that final bend in the 400 meter with the roar of the entire Australian populace behind her. An Aboriginal woman standing up and representing Australia equally with all involved and with all cheering her on to the finish. There's so many layers to that story. There's so much about it that it puts it amongst the all-time, if you were compiling a top 10 Olympic moments, it's in there. Just a wonderful moment that still gives you goosebumps when you think about it. It's you can see it out there on YouTube and other sites like that if you really want to rewatch it after listening to this. Just a wonderful moment and wonderful games, and that would be my gold medal.
It's hard to top that, and I'm probably not going to top it, so I need to go with a performance that was the same type of level, but for Canada as a country was finally we're standing up for ourselves. We're allowed to be brash. We're allowed to be proud, and we're allowed to be fast. Donovan Bailey, 1996 gold medal winner. That is my gold medal because it marked, and now with hindsight, 20 years later, it marked a change of attitude for athletes in this country that was being accepted before it was, and before worse, at least at the Olympic level. If you're looking at hockey, we can say still hear the same talk. Example, PK Subban, oh, he's so arrogant, whatever. Come on. You're allowed to be proud. You're allowed to be brash. You're allowed to be who you are. And Donovan Bailey was one of the stories that led to a change of attitude for athletes in Canada. And for me, when we're looking at the Donovan Bailey story, that's what it brought. It's that attitude that, you know what, I'm loud and I'm going to beat you on the track. And what do you have to say about it? Well, exactly.
Yeah, and look, I think this is about the fourth time that we've talked about the 96 sprints in one way or the other in this show, because it remains for both of us one of those iconic, memorable moments from both. I think that it works on an international level, but particularly from a Canadian level. And this show has never hidden the fact that that's what it is at its root, right? I also would put that right up there. It would be my personal gold medal along with the 84 swimmers. Alex Bauman and Victor Davis. I've talked about a lot on the show before in the past. So yeah, that one stands out. The 4x1 team too, and it's kind of the same event when you think about it with 20 years of hindsight on it, right? Of blends together. I was very happy at the Pan Am Games in Toronto last year that it was the 4x1. It was Donovan Bailey that lit it. It was kind of contrived how they did it because we don't light things well, but
even at the Pan Am level.
Yeah, he jumped off the CN Tower to light the flame anyway.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah.
But it was the 4x1, so each of those four members got their moment in that team. And I think there's something about the fact that a team won from a sprint kind of appeals to Canadian sensibilities a little too. So that 4x1 would be.
And there was Eglos and Francos in that team. So yeah, that team was very Canadian.
Yeah, so that one always stands out. Real quick before we say goodbye, the Laura Wilkinson was the name of the other gold medalist that dove. She's not quite as old as Mr. Le Guinness, but nonetheless, two very fit athletes still diving for fun and still diving well, and that's what the Olympic spirit is all about. Kevin, any final thoughts on our show, our live show, our 100th show before we say goodbye?
Well, it's been a long journey, and I can't wait to continue on the journey to Rio now, and it's going to be quite a story to tell over the next few months.
It absolutely is. Kevin, as always, say goodbye.
Until next time on the Sports Podcast Network for all your soccer needs, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. on SPN Radio, you have Soccer Today. And until then, own your podium, folks. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.